Welcome to Season 2 of the Let's Talk podcast hosted by WellHouse Church, where we talk about what it's like to be a Christian Monday through Saturday, to be a person of faith in a culture against faith. So let's talk about healing, and specifically deconstructive healing. What I have noticed over the last couple years of my life, the buzzword that is deconstruction now typically comes with a lot of negative feelings and emotions for anyone using that word. Deconstruction is a hard thing, but we don't talk about it as what it actually is. It is it is a version of healing. You are taking a worldview that was handed to you, that was broken, and therefore,
or that you have now decided,
is broken. Correct.
You need to give the autonomy.
Yeah,
to it.
yeah.
You
For
could
sure.
have continued to live in it. You chose to say that it was broken and break away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have now decided that this no longer works, and you now need to fix that. That's healing.
Or that's the first step.
That's the first step in this healing process.
Yeah.
I also think it is extremely important to talk about it. As we've been talking about healing, we've been talking about it as in three categories of bodily, physical healing, spiritual healing, and emotional healing.
Mm-hmm.
Deconstruction, I think, falls in the emotion and spiritual categories of healing. Because as you break down the worldview that you've been handed, this has been true for both of us, you uncover a massive amount of trauma that you had no idea was connected to this worldview. Right?
It's definitely true for me. So, I mean, if you don't know my story, I grew up in church, baptized at like 7, I think, 6 or 7, something like that. And at, I think, like 15 or 16, decided I wanted to be a preacher. Like, accepted a call to ministry, never wavered on it. Started dating my high school sweetheart when I was 17, my senior year of high school. She was 16. We dated 4 years. Grew up, we went to the same church. Grew up fundamental Baptist.
Ended up going to the same school.
Yeah, Southern Baptist Convention, Baptist Church in Texas. Date for 4 years. I go to undergrad and my first master's degree at Houston Baptist. She's there doing a nursing degree. I am working full-time as a youth and associate pastor during this period. We get married, 7 years, and it was during that time that I began deconstructing. When I was at HBU and I started my graduate work, I began my deconstruction journey, and that was in 2014, the fall of 2014. And so in July of 2021, I separate from my wife. We've been married for 6.5 years. I separate from my wife. A month later, find out it's because she's cheating on me and leaving me for somebody else. That broke me in some ways, and I realized that I was really unhealthy for a really long time. Now looking back on it, because of the very conversation we're having, I might say for my entire life, I've been really unhealthy. I don't think I've ever met the healthy version of myself.
Me either.
And so I started trauma therapy in January of this year, and it was a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
the way in which it opened up processing of things I knew were present or that I was blocking out, and the intersectionality of all of it. Yes, when you start deconstructing one thing, the intersectionality of the way your emotions and spiritual, specifically if you're deconstructing like religious traumas and things like that, like I got a lot of like religious trauma. I got a lot of purity culture trauma. I got a lot of courtship culture trauma. I've got just massive amounts of religious trauma just oozing. Yeah, all of those things are connected. There's an interconnection, intersectionality to all of them in a very real and present way.
Sure. And I mean, my story isn't too terribly much different, minus like the marriage piece. Grew up in the same kind of setting and with all of the same traumas from the church.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is like, because it's your worldview, it's a part of who you are.
Yeah, and so when you start to break off the pieces of that, it feels like part of your identity is
going away.
It. Yeah.
So as you're unraveling if we can just call it what it is, the clusterfuck that is this religious trauma thing, or that's not really religious trauma, but this changing and like trying to understand your worldview better, and then understanding it doesn't work. And as you're unraveling that, you also start unraveling all of these things that you felt were a part of you, right? The purity culture thing, like, oh my God, was that big for me and for a lot of other people I know.
Yeah.
Because like you've based your entire life around this honestly almost kind of pious thing that's, oh, I'm not going to have sex with anyone that I'm not married to. And you end up creating this like this image that your worth is connected to your purity, your innocence.
Yeah.
And so when you overstep that, what happens? You break.
Yeah.
Or when you realize that this idea no longer works, where does my worth come from now?
Yeah.
If my worth is not connected to my purity,
yeah,
my innocence, where is my worth coming from?
Yeah.
That's why I think it's really important when you're going through deconstruction to, one, talk about it as healing, because it is healing. You're healing a broken worldview. But to do these two things together, to not only start to heal the spiritual side, the intellectual side,
yeah,
because deconstruction is also more than just like faithful deconstruction. And like you can have, when you start doing one, you end up doing the others.
yeah.
But it is more than just like deconstructing theology.
Yeah. Well, and to carry your purity culture metaphor,
Yeah.
for sure. Part of healing that is, like, I know for me, right, I grew up in purity culture. I got married at 21 and 20 because I was not a virgin when I started dating my ex-wife. And, like, we couldn't have sex because that's what the church says. So for 4 years, we didn't have sex. And I guarantee you that the fact that we couldn't have sex led us to get married earlier than we would have.
Mm-hmm.
And had we not, I probably wouldn't have gotten married.
Yeah.
And so part of that is like on the other side of that is healing, because like now I have this major pain and trauma that happened because of my religious system and beliefs. And so the healing of that journey of rejecting purity culture is also healing those memories of how it harmed me and got me where I am and those pains, as well as going, how do I heal and build a new worldview of dating moving forward? What is that way? What if purity culture is not the answer? What is the actual ethic of Jesus? What is those boundaries? How should I be manifesting those in an appropriate way? Like, that is also the healing journey.
For sure. Absolutely it is. And so instead of talking about this as just like, well, here, maybe it's better worded this way. If you're deconstructing and don't have like some sort of emotional healing element to your deconstruction as well, whether it's therapy or some sort of support group or whatever, maybe it's like a covenant group or something. If you don't have some sort of emotional support system through deconstruction, you are leaving out a huge piece and honestly doing yourself a disservice, I would say, because you're unraveling all these traumas and not touching them.
Yeah.
So if you're only handling this like intellectual side of deconstruction and forgetting the emotional side, man, we're missing something here. And when I realized that was actually about a couple months ago. When I started my own therapy, and I realized that like I have so much hurt and trauma that I didn't realize I had until I started deconstructing.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big deal. And now, like, it actually got to the point after I started deconstructing and started, like, understanding where all of this pain and trauma is coming from. I hadn't stepped foot in, like, a traditional church since we started until, like, a couple weeks ago. I had not stepped foot in a traditional church in, like, 2 years.
Yeah.
Because there was so much pain and trauma there. And that's not okay.
Yeah, that's me too. I stepped in one for a funeral, and it was quite triggering. It was also the exact building where a lot of my religious trauma stems from. I was there for a funeral of someone that I deeply care about.
I was actually talking about on like a Sunday morning for Sunday service.
Oh no, I could not.
Yeah.
I could not. Nope. I wouldn't even make it through announcements in the first song. I'd be out there real quick, fast, and in a hurry.
It was a CBF church. So it was like very different, but like I still found myself ready to attack.
Super liturgical?
Not super liturgical, but like
they robe up?
No.
Okay.
Actually, senior pastor, she had COVID, so wasn't there.
Got it.
Had somebody else step in.
A lot of CBF churches are quite liturgical, high church. They will robe up.
There was definitely liturgical elements to it. They were ringing bells and
because
like
they're giving over to ecumenicalism.
Yeah, and
it's a whole thing.
It's cool. But when he started preaching, the guest guy started preaching. If he's a seminary student somewhere, I didn't ask. I kept finding myself
probably Truett if it's a CBF church. They have a San Antonio campus.
I was thinking it was Truett. But like I don't know. I kept waiting for him to say something that was going to piss me off.
Did he?
No.
Yeah.
I was so ready just because I was sitting in chairs in church on Sunday morning. I was so ready and so prepared to feel attacked by something that this dude is saying.
Yeah.
Even though I handpicked this church to not have that. Right? Like, I did all of the things that I could do to protect me and the person that I went with from that, going to church on a Sunday morning. And still sitting there, I was ready to, like, get up and walk my happy ass out.
Yeah,
right? Because, like,
easy.
Huh?
It ain't that
easy. It ain't that easy.
No, this whole idea of deconstructive healing is a long journey. And in the same way, right, Clayton is telling you an experience right now where he stepped into a church and had all of these experiences. But I guarantee you that Clayton has moments, just like I do, as single men out in the world still battling with purity culture and lust and, you know, all of those kinds of things. And I guarantee you the way in which he thinks about dating and engaging in emotional relationships, because all of those things.
It's very hard.
The intersectionality of these things and the way in which when you start deconstructing one, they all begin to break down, because you realize that when you give yourself over to a religious system, a worldview, you give your life over to that. And so, especially from early onset like we did, we build our entire lives around it. And so everything, when you begin to break them down, everything begins to change, right? I mean, I changed the way I thought about my marriage, right? Like when you come to a place where you're like, well, if women can preach and there's really no different and they're actually equal, well, then I got to get rid of that spiritual head of the household nonsense. And we got to be actual equals. And so, oh, wait, now I got to learn how to actually communicate in my marriage, because my wife has equal say and she doesn't just have to do what I tell her to. You have to heal all of these things. All of these things are interconnected and interrelated. And that's why we say all the time, you need a therapist to help you do this. Because you're breaking down very core beliefs that you think about yourself, that you think about the way the world exists, all of those things. You have to do this in therapy. And, you know, for some people, because I do think it's a spiritual element, and I do think there's a emotional element to it, but for some people, maybe you need to do this in spiritual direction. Like, maybe you are a therapist, and you don't need more therapy.
Well, no. Therapists always need their own therapists.
Well, of course, and that's why I said more therapy.
Oh, more. Okay, fair enough.
You don't need more therapy. You need a spiritual director. You need a spiritual expert to speak voice into that element of your healing.
And that's where it started for me, was sitting in these chairs on these podcasts, right, where I'm forced to ask all the hard questions. That's where I really started deconstructing. And like I've told my deconstruction story on this podcast before. You can go back and find both mine and Cullen's stories.
They were old.
They are old.
They were old, and they're out of date because so much deconstruction has happened.
We probably need to update those, like do a deconstruction update. But I started and stopped my deconstruction so many times and just didn't have the language for it. But like I am now in a place where I realize that as I am deconstructing and continuing to deconstruct, I am finding new traumas, new hurts, at every step of the way. And you kind of got to take them as they come and deal with them as they come. And sometimes that actually means putting a pause on the intellectual side, the spiritual side of deconstruction, to handle the emotional. Because if you continue to keep unraveling that clusterfuck, you're just adding more and more traumas to it that you're not dealing with.
Well, I also think part of it is, and this would be my plug for Brian Zahn's new book, When Everything's on Fire. Part of it, I think, is remembering that it's a journey of healing, that deconstruction is a journey of healing. And part of doing that is making sure that you have time with Jesus for Jesus to speak words of healing into you. Whether you do that through scripture, whether you do that through prayer, whether you do that through contemplation, meditation, some mixture of all, rule of life, Sabbath, but finding time for Jesus to speak words of healing into that journey alongside you. Because what we are all guilty of in this is deconstructing the intellectual part of this and trying to make sense of all the hurt that has been caused to us. Excuse me. that in that journey we forget there is a very real God and a very real person of Jesus that wants a relationship and to speak words of love and wholesome healing into you.
Well, and also what we end up doing if we're not dealing with the emotional piece, that hurt and that trauma continues to fester and get worse until you become the problem.
Yeah.
Like, let's not forget about this piece of like overcorrecting.
Yeah.
That was something that whenever I was sitting in this church, because they are liturgical, they had a time of silent confession. And I was like, I haven't done one of these in a hot minute. I don't even know how to do this anymore. Why do I not know how to do this anymore? I have overcorrected. I've gone so far.
Yeah.
They're like, this thing that is actually great.
And that you have to practice.
I don't know how to do this anymore.
Yeah.
God, forgive me for overcorrecting.
Yeah.
Forgive me for forgetting the good pieces of the thing that I was raised with. Because of all of this bad crap connected to it, I have forgotten so much of the good and the beauty in it. And I have become the problem. I have become so judgy about the judgy people.
And that realization, that moment of confession is deconstructive healing.
Absolutely it is.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk podcast hosted by WellHouse Church. Be sure to give us a rating and a review if you enjoyed the episode. It's free and it helps us immensely. Also, feel free to check out our other podcasts.